Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Kristen Welker in Washington. We begin with breaking news amid new fallout tied to the Epstein files. Right now, former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton is behind closed doors near her home in Chappaqua, New York, for a deposition for the House Oversight Committee as part of its Epstein investigation, with committee members set to question former President Bill Clinton tomorrow. According to her opening statement, Secretary Clinton told lawmakers she could not recall ever meeting Mr. Epstein and that she had no new information for their investigation. She also accused Republicans of partisan political theater. Committee Chair James Comer speaking to reporters from Chappaqua, pushing back.
Democrats voted to subpoena the Clintons. The Democrats voted with the Republicans to hold the Clintons in contempt. So the Democrats have just as many questions for the Clintons as the Republicans. So this isn't a partisan witch hunt. This was a motion, a bipartisan motion supported by the Democrats to bring the Clintons in. So I don't think it's any type of being unfair in any way to the Clintons.
Now, as we just noted, former President Bill Clinton is slated to be deposed tomorrow. For the first time, a former president has ever been compelled to testify as part of a congressional investigation. And Democrats on the Oversight Committee say they're now setting their sights on the current president.
So we should be very clear that now that we're going to hear from former President Clinton, I hope that Chairman Comer and the Republicans will join us in demanding that the person who actually appears more times in the files than the former president, who we want to speak with, is President Donald Trump.
Now, we should note that neither of the Clintons have been accused of any wrongdoing or charged in connection with the Epstein investigation. But this does all come amid new scrutiny over the Justice Department's compliance with the Epstein disclosure law. NBC News confirms the DOJ has not released some files related to a woman who had made an allegation against President Trump. The FBI conducted multiple interviews with that woman who accused Epstein of abusing her. A source familiar with the Justice Department's investigation tells NBC News she also made an additional allegation tied to Mr. Trump about an incident when she was 13 years old. The White House has pushed back against allegations raised against the president, saying the files contain, quote, untrue and sensationalist claims against him. NBC News Chief Capitol Hill correspondent Ryan Nobles joins me from Chappaqua, along with NBC News White House correspondent Monica Alba. Thanks to both of you for starting us off. Ryan, I have to start with you. You are there outside this hearing. What has the reaction been so far from both Republicans and Democrats to today's deposition?
Well, we haven't heard from Republicans since the deposition began. At one point, they had promised us that they were going to come out each hour to update us on the progress of these talks, and they have not done that quite yet. But Democrats did come out about halfway through and said that Hillary Clinton has answered every single question, that she has not taken the fifth, that she's explained different aspects of what the Republicans were asking, including and most specifically that she had no ties to Jeffrey Epstein or Ghislaine Maxwell, that she did not know them, and that she certainly knew nothing about their criminal activity. And one of the things that the Democrats really honed in on was this idea that it was all taking place behind closed doors. And they wanted to make it clear that this information, the entire video and transcript of this deposition, be brought out into the public as soon as possible. Take a listen.
The full transcript, unedited, of the Secretary's questions and the answers need to be released by the majority in the next 24 hours. We need the public and the American people have a right to know exactly what she said, what questions were asked of her, and how she responded. That's transparency. We're hopeful that tomorrow, for the former president, that the press would be allowed in and the public as well. That's been the request.
Now, there's no reason to think that wasn't going to happen already. The committee's had a pretty good track record of producing the entire video and transcripts of the depositions that they've conducted up until this point. But there was a little bit of a dust-up today when Congresswoman Lauren Boebert covertly took a photo of the secretary before she began answering her questions and then sent it to a conservative influencer who then shared it all across the internet. They paused the deposition for a minute to remind everyone as to what the rules were stated around this deposition. But Democrats are pointing out, why are you sending pictures of the secretary when we wanted the whole thing to be public? It just doesn't make any sense. Kristen.
And Ryan, of course, we're anticipating former President Clinton will be deposed tomorrow. What are you expecting? Have you gotten any preview there?
So I do think that tomorrow's deposition will probably go much further in terms of the overall goal of this investigation, to learn as much as they possibly can about Jeffrey Epstein and the conspiracy associated with his criminal sex trafficking network. Hillary Clinton, there's just no evidence that she had any sort of relationship with Jeffrey Epstein or Ghislaine Maxwell. The same cannot be said for President Clinton. There is a long track record of information in the files that shows him with Jeffrey Epstein. He has written in his own memoir about his connections with Jeffrey Epstein and saying that he'd wished that he'd never met him and that he wished that he had not developed that relationship. What he's never answered, though, are substantive questions about that relationship. What kind of interactions did they have? Where did they meet? Where did they go? What did they do? Was it just a surface level relationship, or was there more to it? I can bet that that's some of the things that both Republicans and Democrats will be pressing the president on tomorrow.
Yeah, no doubt about that. All right, Ryan Nobles from Chappaqua, thank you so much for starting us off. Monica, Alba, let me head over to you at the White House. What has the reaction been from the White House? We know that there's been an attempt, obviously, in the wake of the State of the Union, to stay focused on issues like the economy. What's the strategy there?
Absolutely, Kristen. But I think in the words of a senior administration official some time ago, since we've been talking about this issue overall for so long, this is the one that kind of hangs over the White House that just doesn't go away. And the president has been clear in the last couple of months that he did push for that transparency. He signed that legislation into law to get the initial files out. And he has continued, and the White House has continued to point to that as evidence that the president supports more of this information to come out and to be released. But as we delve into these files, and as you mentioned, NBC's own reporting and confirmation of these questions about what might still be withheld and has not been released publicly that could be related to President Trump based on allegations from an Epstein victim, that just, again, raises these questions for the White House once more. And they like to continue to point to and refer to a DOJ statement in which they say that this president, in terms of information in the file, has been accused of things that have not been true, that have not come true, and that have been just simply included in these files as sensationalist information. So they do continue to reiterate that the president hasn't been accused of any wrongdoing when it comes to his ties to Jeffrey Epstein. But again, this just does raise more questions, even though you're absolutely right to say this White House is focused on a complete different set of priorities and topics right now.
Monica, let me ask you about this aspect of it. NBC News has confirmed the Justice Department has not released some of the files, particularly related to a woman who made allegations against President Trump. The president has denied any wrongdoing. But what's the White House saying about these specific files?
Yeah, and they are really overall pointing to what Attorney General Pam Bondi said some time ago, which is that all of the files that they plan to release have been released. That is the Trump administration view of this, and that if there's additional information out there, there was reason to withhold it that needed to be part of that justification, either to protect the identity of somebody or because it included information that, again, for whatever reason and determination, DOJ decided it shouldn't be made public. So this is a White House that is essentially trying to argue that this is case closed. But again, I think the public pressure continues, and the president is likely to face more questions about this in the days ahead.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. Mon, let's shift gears for just a second. The Washington Post is reporting today that activists are coordinating with the White House on what they're describing as a draft executive order. It would effectively give the president authority over voting ahead of November's midterm elections. They're alleging that China intervened in the 2020 election. What are you hearing? What are your sources telling you about this effort?
Well, the White House tells me that essentially they are always in contact with outside groups, that they are always being presented with pitches or possibilities of things that could end up eventually becoming a draft of an executive order, but that is something that is not necessarily the case for this specifically. They did put out a statement saying overall that the president is incredibly concerned about the status of elections, and that is why he has continued to ask Congress and lawmakers to support the Save America Act, and he is still looking at other possible reforms to election security, though again they wouldn't confirm necessarily that that specific 17-page executive order that the Washington Post reported on is actually being considered at this time. Kristen.
All right. Monica Alba, thank you so much. We really appreciate it. Joining me now, Democratic Congressman Suhas Subramanyam of Virginia. He's a member of the House Oversight Committee. Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it, Congressman.
Thank you for having me.
So you were in the room. What are your biggest takeaways so far from the deposition of Secretary Hillary Clinton?
Well, my biggest takeaway is she shouldn't be deposed. I mean, there's really not much information that she could provide us. Certainly, we're happy to talk to anyone who has information about Jeffrey Epstein, Ghislaine Maxwell, but she certainly seems to not have much information to provide us. And it's very interesting to see that, Les Wexner, who bankrolled Jeffrey Epstein for many, many years, when we had a deposition of him in Ohio, 0 Republicans showed up. Yeah, here they are. There's about 10 or 11 Republicans here to depose Hillary Clinton. It just shows the partisan nature from their end on this investigation. But we're going to continue to investigate and make it nonpartisan on the Democratic side.
Very quickly, because Secretary Clinton, in her opening statement, said she doesn't recall ever meeting Jeffrey Epstein. Did she affirm that under oath during the deposition?
One thing I would really like is for the transcript to be released within the next 24 hours. We're technically not supposed to say anything specific from what happened, but I would say that when the transcript is released, we will see a lot of people be surprised by how good Secretary Clinton was, as well as how embarrassing it was for Republicans to try to figure out how to corner her, and yet she ran circles around them today. And so I think we're going to ask for that transcript to be released so that the American people can see that Republicans were, staking their claim and trying to make this partisan and try to say that this is a Democratic hoax and blame Democrats when it really was not.
And I know you're criticizing Republicans for focusing on Hillary Clinton, but 3 Democrats on your committee did vote to hold her in contempt for initially refusing to testify. If she had nothing to say, why do you think they voted to hold her in contempt?
Well, I think they wanted to be consistent with the fact that we don't want people evading our committee. I would say that, the Clintons, did eventually show up, and we did make this happen. So they're here now. They're answering questions. But certainly we don't want our committee to be, run over. This administration has done that the most. We also, in that same vote, tried to hold Pam Bondi in criminal contempt. But the reality was that this Republican majority didn't want to do that. But Pam Bondi and Donald Trump and others in this administration continue to withhold 2.5 million files, and that's what makes it difficult to do this investigation.
And I know you can't provide specifics, but broadly speaking, did Secretary Clinton give any insight into her husband's relationship with Jeffrey Epstein or any new details in that regard?
I think we're going to find out more about what President Clinton has to say tomorrow and his involvement. And, that's why he's here. And certainly I think there'll be more members of our committee here tomorrow because they're very interested in his testimony.
Let me ask you, because Congressman Robert Garcia has said this now sets a precedent for the committee, speaking to President Trump potentially, who's also, of course, been named in the Epstein files. Do you think that is something that Democrats will continue to press for? He has denied any wrongdoing.
I think again, if they're going to bring in former President Clinton, who has been seen in the files a fraction of the amount of times as President Trump, we should be bringing in President Trump, and we should be bringing him in now. If we want answers about his involvement and why he refuses to release all of the files, he's the best person to talk to, right? And so we should get past just press gaggles and one-off answers and get him in our committee telling us what's going on. I would absolutely support that.
Let me ask you, because House Oversight Committee Chairman James Comer has said that he's looking into reports that have been confirmed by NBC News that the Justice Department, in its release of the Epstein documents, omitted files related to a woman who made allegations against President Trump. What can you tell us about that specifically, and how seriously is the committee looking into those files?
Well, of the files that were released, there were allegations made about President Trump. Some of those were taken down quickly after they were discovered. But we know from what we have that there are missing parts of these documents that have not been released. And so we have a lot of questions about where those pages are, where those documents are. They're clearly part of the 2.5 million that weren't released, as well as many other victim statements, too, that we believe name President Trump. And certainly we're not saying that he is guilty of any allegations, but we want all the evidence. And we want the evidence about all the people who are involved in these crimes. But to do that, you really have to get all the files and get all the evidence to us so we can do our investigation. And certainly the American people want that transparency, too.
Well, we'll be tracking tomorrow's developments closely as well. Congressman Subramanyam, thank you so much for your perspective. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
We thank you for watching. And remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.